Welcome back to the Relocated South African, the show for navigating immigration from South Africa for a better future. As always, I'm your host, Jan Hugo from Lagos in Portugal, and check out our website, www.therelocatedsoutafrican.com, and also subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform. Today's episode's a little different and I think an important one. Many conversations around immigration focus on people in their 20s and 30s, those starting out, building careers or looking for new opportunities. But far fewer stories explore what it's like to make a move later in life. So my guest today is Wendy Williams, who immigrated from South Africa to Australia with her husband and two older children 20 years ago. Welcome, Wendy.
Thanks very much, Jan. Just listening to that makes me realize how long ago it was already that we made this.
Exactly. So, Wendy, I always ask my guests just give us a bit of background, where you're from originally, where did you go to school, study, and just give us just a brief history.
Yeah, sure. I was born in Rhodesia, Zimbabwe, as it is now known, as was my husband. I was the only member of my family who was actually born there. My parents and my older brothers were all born in South Africa, but my parents had gone to Rhodesia to farm, and I was born there and went to primary school, the local country primary school there, went on to high school in Harare, and then to Bulawayo's Teachers College, and finished off at the University of Zimbabwe way back in 1980 with a teaching degree. And the same for my husband. He was also born in Zim to a farming family, also locally educated. And we met when I was just starting out at college, and he was working on the family farm.
Okay. And at that time when you went to college, it was already Zimbabwe. It's no longer Rhodesia. So
When I went to college, it was Rhodesia. It was 77, 78, 79. It was still Rhodesia. 1980, it became Zimbabwe. And, although I started at the University of Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, it changed that year to the University of Zimbabwe.
And then when did you move to South Africa?
So we moved to South Africa in 1984. We had got married. We were living on the family farm, and we had our first son. He was born in Zimbabwe, and then we left for South Africa, April 1984, and our daughter was then born in South Africa.
Okay, and you went farming there as well?
Yes, we did. My husband has been a farmer forever. And we went to South Africa. We could see the writing on the wall in Zim. And we thought, well, we were young enough to give it a go. And we left Zim with our Datsun 120Y, a baby, 2 dogs, and what we could fit into the boot. But, at that age, you are young and fearless, and thought, we can do this. And my husband got a job on a farm doing potatoes in Hoedspruit, of all places.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. And I was teaching. I got a job teaching. And then later on, we made the move to Nelspruit, where we spent the rest of our time that we were in South Africa before leaving for Australia, which was in 2005. So we were there for, close on 20 plus years.
And in Nelspruit doing citrus or?
No, we were tobacco farmers, very politically incorrect now, but my husband loved growing the stuff. It's a very testing crop to grow. So we were doing tobacco farming. He was a manager for only 2 fellows. The second fellow that we worked for was a wonderful man, really got us up onto our feet. And then we bought the farm over the road, and we were there for the 13 years before we made the decision to leave to come to Australia. And we were farming tobacco there as well as vegetables. And I did ducks, but we saw that the future of tobacco was limited. Round about the year 1998, we started to slowly plant macadamias, so that once tobacco was no longer profitable, we would be able to turn to macadamias, which was a lot less labor intensive. So that was our aim. And we got there, we planted good 15, 20 hectares of macadamias. And as they came into full production, we left. Yes.
That's amazing. But just thinking back to your time in Zimbabwe, did your family lose the farm to what happened there, or did you just see the writing on the wall?
We saw the writing on the wall, as did my husband's brother. So we all left at about the same time. And then his parents managed to sell the farm in Zimbabwe. But of course, the catch was you couldn't take your money out. You had to leave your money in government bonds. And after 7 years, the government would start paying you 4%. And by then, of course, the Zim dollar just devalued and devalued. So eventually it ended up my father-in-law actually owed the post office money because all the proceeds from his farm had been swallowed up with inflation. So it left everybody, my parents and his parents, in quite dire financial straits. That was definitely one of the motivating factors behind us coming to Australia, that we did not want to spend our old age concerned about how we were going to afford to live.
If you think back 20 years ago, that kind of feeling that you had that you wanted to leave, was it a sudden thought? Or did it kind of build up to a point where you said, okay, it's time to go?
I think it was quite sudden, Jan. We'd been on holiday to South Africa. My parents were living in South Africa. And I think just on a whim, we started making some general inquiries. Were there any jobs around? And it seemed like there were jobs available for Zimbabwean farmers. And we went back to Zim, broke the news, and left within a few months. Very hard for his folk.
Yeah, I can imagine. And then, in 2005, you kind of went through the same thing. Was that a longer process of deciding, or did you just get to the same conclusion quickly?
Well, we arrived at the same conclusion, but it took a very, very long time. I was the one really dragging my feet. My husband was very skeptical, I suppose is a good word, about how things were panning out in South Africa, and kept saying to me, we've seen this happen before. But I think I was very settled. We'd bought our own farm that we'd worked towards. We were improving it. I had a wonderful job at an independent school as a coordinator of a learning support unit. I had my friends, my family. I really did not think about immigrating at all. And whenever he brought up the subject, I changed the subject or ignored it completely, hoped it would just go away. And then, as fate often does, a very good friend of ours, who was also a Zimbabwean farmer, was murdered on his farm outside of White River, not far from us. And my husband came to me that night and said, "That's it. I don't care where we go, but we are going to sell our farm and we are going to leave." And I thought, well, goodness gracious me, where do we go? Because, we had watched other younger families up and leave the area. Not many, but some. Everybody told us how difficult it was to get into Australia. Our other option was England, because his mum had been born in England and served there during the Second World War, and we could have gone that route, but neither of us could see us settling in England. Too many people, not enough space. What would we do for work? It didn't gel at all. And we happened to see, not long after our friend's funeral, an advert in the South African Sunday Mail, I think it was, about a free assessment with an immigration agent. And we said, oh, well, we're going up to Johannesburg. It's free. What have we got to lose? And yes, so off we went, and we spoke to a gentleman by the name of Gary Loseby. It sticks in my mind. He was actually an Australian, but in Johannesburg, facilitating visas. And he said, yeah, you're in with a chance. So yeah, that was the beginning of the end of our South African sojourn. It took us almost 4 years to sell the farm, to get the visas, to pack up our lives and make the move across to Australia. So that was a long process.
Yeah. Just two questions. I guess the visa you got on the strength of your teaching qualification, because they like South African teachers.
Well, yes, that's what we had originally applied for. But there's a story behind that, Jan, because our agent was quite clear that he felt that we would get in on my teaching degree. So I would be the primary applicant. And we were going to move to Perth. I have a cousin south of Perth. We had extra points because of that. And on the Friday afternoon, I remember it clearly, we had signed the papers to sell our farm. So we had a buyer. We signed the papers. Monday, I went into school and it was 7:45 and my phone rang and it was Gary. And he said to me, Wendy, I don't want you to panic. And of course, the first thing you do is panic. I said, well, what has happened? And he said, they've rejected your qualification. And I said, well, now what? I said, we've just sold our farm on Friday. You know, there's no going back for us. And he said, but I think with your qualifications and your experience, we can get you to Australia as a childcare director, which was on the skills shortage list. And I've never done childcare in my life, but in my job, I'd had a lot to do with younger children, writing programs, supporting their educational development. And he said, come on, let's go for this, because this is now August and I was turning 45 in November. So my qualifications had to be assessed. And we had to get the application in before my 45th birthday. So everything fell into place. I had my qualifications assessed. We completed the application, paid our money, and he was another agent who only asked for 50% until the visa was provided. So we paid our money and I turned 45 on the Wednesday, but they had received our application on the Monday. So we just squeaked through.
Fantastic. Well, it's always a good story. So just thinking now, it must have been quite a tough time, the 4 years from deciding till leaving, in terms of you're kind of in limbo, you don't really know where you are and so on. How did you guys cope with that?
I suppose just day by day, we had made our plans. We actually didn't tell very many people at that stage because we had no idea whether our visa would be accepted. And, we were busy still developing the farm, still educating our children. Life still went on. So I don't think we gave a lot of thought to it. My feeling, I think, at the time was it's in the lap of the gods. I've done what I can do. If we get the visa, if we get a buyer for the farm, well, then we're on our way. But if not, well, we'll just have to decide what we're going to do next. But it never came to that. Yeah, the visa came through. And although we ended up accepting a visa from South Australia, so we couldn't go to WA, in the long run, it's turned out to be a wonderful decision. We love South Australia. And also we got instant PR. So as soon as we landed at Adelaide Airport, we had permanent residence, which meant we had Medicare, and our daughter, who was going to go to university, qualified as a domestic student, which was huge because the international fees are phenomenal. They're like 5 times the amount. So yes, the 4 years, they didn't really drag. Isn't that strange? I think because we were so busy, still with the farm, still with the family and children and everything that goes with that.
How old were the kids at that time? You said your daughter was university age and your son?
Well, when we left, our daughter just finished year 12 and our son had just finished uni in Pretoria.
Okay.
So when we left, she was 18 and he was 21. But before we made the final decision, we brought them across to Australia to have a look-see, because we said we either all go as a family or none of us go. We're not going to have kids here and us stay there. Either we all go as a family unit or it's off the table. And we brought our children to Australia, and of course they just loved the freedom. They could get on a bus, they could walk around the city at night, they could window shop, they could go to pubs and bars and catch a taxi home. They couldn't believe the amount of freedom that they had, especially after us living on a farm where we were so insistent. When you're on your way home, you must phone us, so we're waiting for you. And, if you're 10 minutes late, it was panic stations. Where are these kids? Why aren't they home yet? And suddenly they came here to Australia, a country that they did not know anything about really. And they just had this huge freedom to do things without us permanently being there watching over them. And yes, I think they would have been on the first flight back to Australia at that stage. They were very happy to make the move.
Okay, excellent. And, again, thinking back when you now arrived in Australia, with permanent residents, strangers, and so on, but really not much of a support network there. Was that tough for you guys?
Yes, it was quite tough, but we knew people from Zim who had gone farming in Mount Gambier. So we had touched base with them, and they had pointed us in the direction of people who were looking to hire what they call farm managers, but you're actually just a farm worker. You do everything. So Joe had an interview and started working almost straight away, which was great.
That also.
Yeah. So yes, we didn't have a lot of support, but we had the family unit, which was good. Joe started working immediately. Our daughter had a job within a week of landing in Mount Gambier. Our son and myself took a little bit longer because it turned out that my qualification was recognized.
Okay.
And once I'd spoken to the authorities and they'd gone through all the checks, I could apply for my teacher's registration to be able to teach in Australia. And yeah, that's what I did for 15 years.
So just as a family unit, obviously you guys had to be very close in terms of supporting each other and not one saying it was a mistake or whatever. Was that the case? That you guys were always very supportive, and not everybody's going to be up at the same time? There must have been ups and downs. Is that your experience as well?
Yes, lots of ups and downs. But as you say, there was always one of us that was positive when the others were struggling a bit. And we had said right from the beginning, it's not going to be easy. It's a big move, this, but it's heads down. We're going to find a way and we're going to do it well. And yeah, the kids were great. As I said, my daughter started working within a week. She's never looked back. My son took longer to find a job, but yeah, eventually that fell into place. It was actually us that took longer to settle because, as I think I might have mentioned in my letter to you, that my husband decided after 3 years that farming was not going to be a long-term option for him.
Yes,
and did a complete 180-degree turn.
Wow, that is brave. That is very brave.
Very brave.
And it turned out to be a good decision.
It was a wonderful decision. I mean, it took us completely by surprise. He come to me one night because a lot of the farmers, not all of them, but a lot of them only take on older workers as casuals. So you never get anything like sick leave or holiday leave, and they pay the absolute basic salary. There's no recognition of experience. In this particular case, listen, we've since been to other farming areas where they do recognize experience. But Joe, at the age of 50, was considered old for farming.
Oh.
Yeah. And he came to me one night and he said, this is not going to end well. I'm not getting any younger. I'm on absolute minimum wage. I never know from 1 week to the next whether I'm going to have a job or not because I'm casual. And he said, well, we need to make a plan, a better plan than this. And I was like, what plan? Because he's been a farmer. That's what he does. He's been a farmer all his life. And he said to me, and I never forget this, he said, you know, Wens, the whole of Australia runs on hydraulics. And I was like, really? I've no idea. What do hydraulics do? And he gave me a very basic outline, and he'd always been good with fixing implements on the farm and tractors and trucks and goodness knows what else. He said, I think I could do something in hydraulics. Find me a course, because in Australia, I think like many other first world countries, you've got to have some sort of qualification before you do anything. So, okay, onto the internet I go, and I'm looking for TAFE courses on hydraulics. And as the internet does, it throws up adverts. And one of the adverts was for a company based in Adelaide who were looking for franchise owners. Okay, well, we were coming up to Adelaide to see our daughter who was at uni at that stage. I said, well, you know, let's go and see what it entails. And I wasn't very positive, I suppose, because for one, my husband's never lived in a city, except for the couple of months that we lived in Sunnyside while we were waiting for our visa. That was a whole other experience, as you can imagine. It would mean driving a mobile workshop all over Adelaide, servicing hydraulics on big equipment and trucks and all the rest. And it would mean using spanners, heavy tools and equipment. And by this stage, he was nearly 54. And I thought, wow, I don't know. But again, things happen, don't they? He met the owner of the service centre, who was very positive, said, why don't you come and work for me for a couple of months, see how the whole franchise system works? He said, you know, if you like it, we can talk and make a plan for you to get your own route. And if you don't, we shake hands and part as gentlemen. And yeah, so the door just opened. We moved up to Adelaide, rented a house. Joe was there for 3 months and said, yeah, I really enjoy this. I think I can really do it. And he was happy for us to put down a deposit on the business. We flew off to Albury Wodinga, which is on the New South Wales-Victoria border, to do the course, which was only a 2-week course, and blow me down. There he was, a hydraulic technician, and just flew, just never looked back. It was just a complete 180 from everything he had done before.
That is amazing. That's such a good story.
Yeah, I'm amazed more than anybody else, because I just thought that this is so far out of his comfort zone. And at the age of 54, you know, do you really want to be starting in a brand new career, which is quite physical? And he said, yeah, let's give it a go. And he did. And here we are.
Awesome. I mean, through all this kind of changes and difficulty, did you ever consider going back to South Africa?
Never for one moment. Never on our itinerary. We would come hell or high water. We were going to make it work. And everybody else who I've spoken to in the expat community who have made a success of their lives here have all come with that attitude. We have to make it work. We are going to find a way. We are hardworking people. We're educated. We will find something and we will make this work. And I think you have to come to that with that mentality, because the early years are not easy.
Absolutely. You can't look over your shoulder. Because I always say, if you say it's, if it doesn't work, we'll go back, you will go back, because you mustn't have that attitude. So that's great to hear.
Yeah, no, you have to be, you've just got to stick with it and believe that things eventually will turn. And they do.
Have you been back to South Africa in the 20 years?
Oh, yes, we've been back 3 or 4 times. My brother-in-law still lives in South Africa, Gunubi, and my own brother still lives in Victoria Falls in Zimbabwe. So, yes, we've been back, I think, 4 times. The last time was 2019.
Okay. I never felt the urge to want to go back.
No, I think the total opposite, Jan. I think every time I've been back, I've been more grateful for the decision that we made, especially when we went back to our old farm this last time. It was a beautiful 80 hectares right in the middle of what was called the Heidelberg Valley. Excuse me, I must just have a sip. And it's on the road that joins Lydenburg to Sabi. Beautiful farms on either side of the road. And we drove down the road, and on both sides of the road are these huge electrical fences. All the farmers got together and funded it. It's like 22 kilometers of continuous fencing on both sides of the road. It was just phenomenal. I couldn't believe it. And no, I'm I've never wanted to go back. I love being in Australia in that we've been able to do travel while we're here. And it's easy with an Australian passport. And no, and neither of my kids have ever wanted to go back, or my husband. No, we were fully committed, I think.
Okay. And friends-wise, did you and your kids make South African friends or mostly Australian friends? How did that work for you?
My children quickly made Australian friends because they were in Adelaide meeting people at uni, and my son was playing rugby at the rugby club. So they met the odd South African, but basically their friendship group was Australian. For us, it was a little different. The first place we lived was way out of any town. I thought I'd landed on Mars. And yes, my first friend in Australia was the wife of a South African doctor. She and I are still great friends today. And she sort of pulled me through. They had arrived a year earlier. She sort of pulled me through that first really difficult stage of settling.
Obviously, when you look back over the last 20 years, you have no doubt that it was the right decision.
For our family.
Yeah, which is great because you don't want to sit with that kind of regret. Just if you look at Australia, Adelaide and South Australia versus the more kind of well-known places like Sydney and Perth and Melbourne, what would you say is the biggest difference?
Well, we're almost the forgotten state, us and Tasmania. We're a bit off the beaten track. Nobody particularly takes us very seriously. We don't contribute much to the overall wealth of Australia, if I can put it like that. You know, in South Australia, it's almost as big as South Africa, but there's only 1.6 million people in the whole of South Australia. So we are a really insignificant part of Australia. I think the South Australians would not be happy to say. But we are a bit off the beaten track. Our bigger brothers, Melbourne and Sydney and Brisbane, call Adelaide a country town. Very rude of them. But it is very quiet, lots of big, wide open spaces, not lots of people. It is a very, very easy place to live.
And you said in your letter you're buying a house on the coast, retiring now. Is that close to Adelaide or?
Yes, so we're an hour and a half south of Adelaide on the beautiful Fleurieu Peninsula, well known for its beautiful wines and beaches. Yes, we have bought down here. Our children are still in Adelaide, but it's only an hour and a half on a very nice freeway. Not difficult to get up to see our grandchildren. And we have lovely young South African neighbors over the road who have settled here. They had their citizenship ceremony 2 weeks ago. And it's just a fabulous part of the world to live because we have such freedom, no safety issues. I walk at night. I ride my electric bike by myself. You hardly ever think of safety issues. It's not the Garden of Eden. Things do happen, but so rarely that it catches everybody by surprise when it happens, particularly in South Australia, because we are so small.
No, I think that comes out in every conversation I have is that, the safety, and for us as well, we've been in, and we still, think about it when you see a woman running on her own or riding a bike on her own or just walking around, just not thinking about any physical threat that makes such a difference to your quality of life.
It
So,
does.
if you think in 20 years, what do you miss about South Africa?
I miss the thunderstorms, the sound of the lightning striking the granite koppies. I think I miss the sound and the vibe of the indigenous people in South Africa. There was always that little bit of vibe. They were always chatting, making jokes. We used to sell a lot of our vegetables at the market, and we met some truly wonderful people there. And I miss that slice of African life. Yeah, but I think that's about all. Every now and then I go up to Monarto, which is the largest plains zoo in the southern hemisphere, and I go to get my hit of giraffe and rhino and zebra and eland, and kind of settles something in my soul, because there's nothing like the African wildlife, is there?
That's very true. Now, Wendy, we're kind of getting towards the end. Just again, if you think back to your last 20 years, your decision to move, would you say if you could do it over, you would have left earlier?
Yeah, people ask me that, Jan. And I suppose from one aspect, maybe yes, if we had left earlier, but it's hard to know. It was a really good time for us to leave, because our children were just coming to the end of their sort of education, and their friends were going all off in different directions. So they didn't have that pull of the peer group, which I know from some of our family members is very strong for their children, and they have hesitated about breaking their children away from that group when they're so impressionable. But our daughter was finished with high school. Our son was finished with uni. They were both ready to spread their wings. Would it have been easier if Joe had been a bit younger? Maybe. Then, I wonder if we would have looked for a different opportunity like we did, because we realized that farming was not going to be something he would be able to sustain going into his 60s. So I kind of feel it was just the right time. We found a buyer it took us a long time to find a buyer for our farm as well. And at that stage, at least our money was only divided by 4. Now it's divided by 12, which made a big difference, because it meant that we had a bit of money to start with in Australia. We have helped more than a few couples who have arrived with nothing but a suitcase and a tent, but they have been much younger than us. And it's been wonderful watching them get up and onto their feet and start putting it all together and making strides in their new country. So yes, I suppose in some ways it might have been easier, but for us, it was just the right time. It just kind of all gelled and worked for us. Everybody has their own timing, I think.
Absolutely.
What works for one might not work for another.
If you then, maybe as a last thought, if you had to advise somebody coming to you now to say, we've got the opportunity as a young family, should we stay in South Africa, make a life, or should we try somewhere else? What would you say?
Without a shadow of a doubt, grab it with both hands. There are such opportunities here in Australia. You cannot believe the freedom that we have. Things work here. If you can't find the answer from one person in a government department, they will look for somebody else to help you. I've heard that's not the experience for everybody, but all our dealings with the government departments have been wonderful. They have really gone out of their way to point us in the right direction, make sure we've got the right information. Things like that is so easy. And yes, cost of living is expensive. Once you stop converting to rand and you start earning dollars, it's all relative. There's lots of people who support those doing it tough. The one couple, I love this story. He was on the side of the road waiting for his wife, who was having an interview, and there was a student offloading a whole lot of furniture because he was leaving uni, and this young South African that just arrived said, well, what are you doing with all of this stuff? And he said, I've got to pay for it to go to the dump. And this fella said, no, I'm going to go and find a trailer and a ute. And he said to his wife, you just stay here. And off he rushed and hired himself a trailer and a ute and collected all the furniture. And I was chatting to him the other day, and he said that got going. They didn't have to spend much on furniture for the first 3 years. Things like there's food banks where you can go and collect huge food parcels. And I know for many South Africans, it's not what we want to be doing, but it exists in Australia. So if you need the help, you go out and you ask for it, and it is out there. We've just had a huge fire on the Fleurieu Peninsula, and the reaction of the community to supply the fireys, the firefighters, with food and snacks and water and lollies and accommodation and all the rest while they've been here fighting the fire is just overwhelming for this tiny little pocket that we live in. To a large degree, Australia is a very, very generous country. So if you need help, put your hand up, ask for it. You'll be surprised how many people will lend you a hand to get you up and going.
That's fantastic. Oh, it's so good to hear, and I'm so glad things have worked out so well for you guys. It's a wonderful story, and I think a lot of our listeners will benefit from this.
I hope so. The other thing we do now is Joe and I, since we've retired, we run a stall at a beachside market. We call it Safa Bites, and we sell biltong and boerewors. And I would say a good 20% of our customers are ex-South African and Zim. And it's all hearing their stories and seeing how well they're getting along, and just swapping jokes and talking about the Springboks who we went to watch in New Zealand last year when they gave the All Blacks a good clap.
That's always good. Makes you feel very good. South African when we meet any other
Yes, we were all there in our Springbok colours and our flags and our biltong and boerewors, and it was great.
No, I think this is obviously the idea of the podcast is that we meet and we hear stories from everywhere. That's what I find it so refreshing and really interesting to talk to so many different people. And there are similar lines that go through a lot of stories, but everyone is unique in its own way.
So I listen to lots of your podcasts. I'm fascinated with the fellow who lives in Norway now.
Yeah.
At least Australia, we have, similar weather.
Yeah.
Today is a beautiful summer's day. It's warm. All the Aussies, we love our cricket and not so much rugby. Of course, South Australia is a very footy state. We've got to understand footy as well. And it's been a really, really good move. I would say anybody considering it, if you've got the opportunity, grab it now, because I don't know if things will be as easier in the years to come. Migration to Australia.
I'm talking, you may have heard that I've spoken to a few migration agents and people that are saying that it is getting tougher to get visas and to get considered. And older people, it's even more difficult. So,
Yeah. And Wendy, I think that's a trend we're going to see for a while.
Thank you so much for sharing your story so openly and thoughtfully. And I think what stood out for me is that the reminder that it's about the courage to start again, even when it feels uncomfortable and uncertain. So thank you so much for sharing.
It's just got to keep moving uphill eventually. You're going to get close to the top. But thanks, Jan. I've enjoyed chatting to you. And thank you from all of us for doing these podcasts. They're wonderful.
Pleasure. So if you're listening and you're considering a big change in life, or you've already made that move and still finding your feet, I hope this conversation helped you to feel a little less alone. As always, if this episode resonated with you, you're welcome to share it with someone who might need to hear it. And you can find more episodes on our website, therelocatedSouthAfrican.com. Thanks again for listening, and until next time.